Hmm, I don't see everyone. Why is that? There we go.
Okay, well,
Welcome, everyone. We're just taking a moment to let folks enter in. You'll see some notes in the chat. Welcome, welcome. Hey, Alex.
Hello, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
good evening.
Hi, Hattie. Hey, Liz. If you've just popped in, we're just taking some time to let folks arrive, and if you haven't yet, you might check into the chat where you'll see some information. If you want to say hello and let us know where you're zooming in from, that's always kind of fun to see.
Now I see a lot of people's names. I don't see many faces though.
Yeah. So if you're comfortable, leaving your camera on helps us feel a little bit less disembodied than we already feel. But, only as you feel comfortable. If you just want to listen in and keep your camera off, that's okay too. Hey, Ron. Ron says hi, Charles, in the chat.
Hi, Ron.
You're not even looking at the thing. You're just gonna look at your phone. You're the only person on it.
Well, all right, let's give it one more minute,
One
Sean,
more
and then
minute.
we'll get
Sounds
underway.
good.
Hi, Tamara.
So welcome everybody. Forgive me if I look distracted, it's because I'm just admitting people. My name is Sean Whitty, and I'm on the board here at the Institute, and I'm thrilled to be able to be with Charles Styron this evening. Charles is a longtime board member and has some deep knowledge and some things that I'm really excited to explore myself. Transforming negative emotions. We've been offering this series with the board, calling them AMAs, as a way of saying, come and be with us and ask questions. So there'll be a good chunk of opportunity after Charles presents some things to to ask some questions and offer comments. I do want to draw your attention one last time to the chat. This is an offering that's is accompanied by an opportunity to practice dana, which means just giving. So if you'd like to make a donation, there's a link there to do that. And there's also a link to some documents that will be referenced if you haven't seen those yet in your email. Specifically, the first one, the Buddha family spreadsheet, Charles will start with, so you might just check in with that. And then later on, we'll be able to have some questions. You can raise your hand or put something in the chat, and we'll do our best to just have some good conversation. So let me hand it over to Charles briefly, and then we'll have some sitting.
Okay, well, we're just going to sit for about 5 minutes, just unstructured, straight, open meditation. I'm not going to guide, but just sit and pay attention to your mind and let go of any thoughts that arise. So Sean will ring the bell at the beginning and the end.
Yes, and we'll have about 5 minutes. So whatever you need to do to engage in your practice.
Okay. People hear me okay? Assuming. Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to suggest that you download the 2 PDFs that we'll put into the chat if you haven't done that already. It might be helpful for you, and you could print them out. I'll give you half a minute to do that. It'll make things easier for us as we proceed together. So go ahead and do that right now if you haven't done it already, and I'll give you 30 seconds to do that before I actually launch into what I have to say. Now, did any of you have the opportunity to look at that spreadsheet that I sent out? Yeah, I assume that some of you did, and I will be making it clearer what that's all about. So anyway, good evening again. My presentation tonight is entitled Transforming Negative Emotions. We'll be meeting for about an hour and 15 minutes approximately, and I'm going to speak for slightly fewer than 25, probably more like 23, before we open things up for your questions and discussion. Some of you here are very familiar with this topic, and some of you are probably entirely new to it. I will undoubtedly say a few things with which some of you will not be familiar, so please don't worry if some of my initial remarks fail to register. I will eventually come down to solid earth for everyone, or relatively solid, so please stay with me. As I said, my presentation tonight is entitled Transforming Negative Emotions. In case it's not clear, let me be clear. This is a tall order. It's an ambitious undertaking, and some of my language may sound hyperbolic at times. Transforming negative emotions requires considerable equanimity as well as mature affect tolerance. Affect tolerance is the capacity to experience the onslaught of negative emotions without reacting instinctively to them. Sounds easy. It's not. Generally speaking, considerable mind training is the prerequisite for doing this with real grace. In 1982, my first Buddhist teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, was asked what he did when he got depressed. I remember thinking to myself at the time, this was in a large gathering of 400 people, and it was a question period. I remember thinking to myself, don't be an idiot. He doesn't get depressed. Much to my surprise, however, Trungpa said, I get as close to it as I possibly can. Contemplate that idea. Instead of running away from depression, he sidled up to it. What an outrageous idea. In a similar vein, the Dalai Lama has often said that our worst enemies are actually our best friends. Why? Because without serious enemies and seemingly insurmountable obstacles, we would never learn to practice virtue. We wouldn't be motivated to do it. The most difficult Buddhist teaching to grasp and to accept is egolessness. Simply put, egolessness means that there is nothing that we can ultimately call a self. We want to believe in and cling to an abiding, immutable sense of self that doesn't really exist. We all have our relative everyday identities that allow us to function in the world, and for the most part, we do it remarkably well. It's when we attempt to shore up this ever-changing relative identity and make it into something abiding and permanent that we encounter difficulty. In fact, when we try to construct or even find this supposedly immutable thing that we call a self, we can't. This supposed self with a capital S is a reification, a fiction. It doesn't really exist. At some level, we all know this, and yet we seek continually to shore up this fictitious self. We go through the entire day, day after day, doing what my current teacher, Sakyong Mipam, says is reciting the mantra of me. Most of the time, this semi-conscious, unconscious pursuit ensues without notable incident. Notable incidents do occur, however, especially when we encounter powerful negative emotions. These encounters, furthermore, become our principal obstacle to waking up. Awakening here refers to the full awareness of egolessness. This is the awareness that we don't have never had, and will never have a permanent place to hang our hats in this world. So what are these negative emotions? In East Asian traditions, the three poisons, as they are often called, are greed, anger, and delusion. Trungpa Rinpoche translated these three poisons somewhat more heuristically to my way of thinking and speaking as passion, aggression, and ignorance. Generically speaking, these are the three global strategies that we employ for shoring up a fictitious sense of who we are. Passion is the strategy of seducing the world into supporting our sense of who we think we are. Aggression is the strategy of repelling everything in the world that challenges this sense of who we think we are. And ignorance is the strategy of consciously ignoring all the evidence in the world that challenges our sense of who we think we are. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the three poisons, so-called, of passion, aggression, and ignorance are further elaborated into passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride. Jealousy splits off from aggression, and pride splits off from passion. The negative emotions, finally, don't always feel negative. Passion often feels positive. We designate passion as a negative emotion, however, because it clouds our understanding of the truth, even when it feels good. The negative emotions are genuine obstacles to awakening and to well-being, and this fact leads us oftentimes to attempt to banish them. Although widely accepted as the proper way to deal with them, this is ultimately a bad idea. First of all, the negative emotions arose over time in human consciousness because they served an evolutionary purpose. They are not gratuitous negative obstacles. Please take that in. Passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride have evolved in human consciousness over the millennia for various adaptive purposes. It behooves us to understand very intimately what these purposes are. This is where the rubber meets the road, and this is where tonight's presentation focuses. Everything that I've said up to now is a prelude, a setting of the stage. Now we can finally get down to business. I hope that many of you had the opportunity to fill out the spreadsheet that was sent to you previously as an attachment, the Buddha Family's spreadsheet. Sean, would you share that chart on the screen, please? If you haven't had a chance to print this out or download it yourself, you could take a screenshot of it now and do this exercise later if you didn't have a chance to do it before the meeting. This spreadsheet is entitled The Buddha Family's Qualities Worksheet. The Buddha families, and there are 5 of them, could be the subject of another presentation, but I've employed them here to help you identify the qualities with which you have greatest as well as least affinity. And this is a spreadsheet I made up years ago. It's a rank ordering, in fact. Each one of the families, in turn, is associated with a personality style, as well as a particular negative emotion and a particular wisdom manifestation, which will become clear later on. This is likely to be a close correspondence for each of you. There is likely to be a close correspondence for each of you with how you scored on this spreadsheet and those negative emotions and wisdom qualities that are most familiar to you. Let me quickly summarize what you may have already discovered or had a hint of while doing this exercise. If you scored highest on Buddha in this first category, ignorance, that is, self-conscious ignoring and spacing out, are likely to be significant problems for you. And being vastly accommodating is likely to be a significant talent. If you scored highest on Vajra, this column, aggression, anger acted out with the intent to harm, is likely to be a significant obstacle for you, and seeing clearly and analytically is likely to be a significant skill. If you scored highest on karma, this middle column, jealousy is likely to be a significant hindrance for you, and organizing and accomplishing vast amounts of work is likely to be a significant capacity. If you scored highest on Padma, passion, seductiveness is likely to be a significant challenge for you, an obstacle. And communication with great subtlety is likely to be a significant positive quality. If you scored highest on Ratna, this last column, pride is likely to be a significant obstruction for you. And having great equanimity is likely to be a significant gift. Sean, you can stop screen sharing now. The key to transforming negative emotions is learning to maintain a stance of neutrality towards them. In other words, they do not need to be regarded as intrinsically negative. This is something that we do more often out of habit and the negativity bias than for any other reason. It's not necessary or inevitable, but it takes a still, quiet mind to apprehend this fact. We can experience the nascent energy of emotion without necessarily tilting toward negativity or positivity for that matter. Unfortunately, we don't usually notice this energy in its nascent state. We notice it rather after it has tilted toward negativity. The so-called negative emotions can, however, be held in check and regarded as neutral messengers of something that has gone awry in the mandala of our experience, or that something has gone awry in the environment around us, something that needs our attention. The key to transforming negative emotions is learning to decode them and understand what they're telling us without reacting instinctively to them. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, this is referred to as transforming confusion into wisdom. At the beginning, this process is more one of choosing, however, rather than one of transforming. There is a nascent energy of emotion that arises in experience, demanding our attention. In the moment of apprehending this nascent energy, we can simply stay with it, which is a very tall order, or we can go in one of two directions. We can drift in the direction of entertaining the full display of negativity into which this energy can mutate, leading us to habitual acting out in strong emotional expressions of all kinds. This is what we normally do, and it is a form of drifting into confusion. It is definitely a doing on our part, an action. It's instinctual, and more often than not, we have been taught by many others that this is our only option. On the other hand, and this is the import of tonight's presentation, really. On the other hand, and this notion is far less common or recognized, we can lean in the direction of allowing the objective information that is compressed in this nascent energy to unfold in front of us. This allows us to drift in the wisdom direction, and this is far less of a doing than it is of an allowing. Wisdom comes to us when we are ready to receive it. Feminine principle. Acting out destructively is something that we do. Masculine principle. When we become true yogis of the spirit, masters of awareness and exemplars of egolessness, tall order, this miasma of nascent energy, destructive emotion, and illuminating wisdom becomes an ocean in which we can theoretically swim with joyful abandon. confident of the possibility of transformative alchemy in every moment. Don't think for a minute that just because I'm saying these things that I can actually perform these transformations with ease, though. I can't, far from it. But I have received teachings from a number of adepts who can and who do. And this serves as inspiration and fuels confidence on the path, which we're all on in some fashion or another. Consider the following simile. You have a quantum of refined uranium ore in your hand. It can be fashioned into an atomic bomb, in which case the energy will be expended in an instant, and the downstream negative consequences of the explosion will be harvested for decades. Or, on the other hand, it can be expended in a controlled fashion, fission, over a very long period of time and produced prodigious benefits. The nascent energy of emotion is like this quantum of uranium ore. How are we going to use it? Ultimately, we are engaged in an energetic calculus of psychological resources. Do we discharge it all and straight into entropy? Or do we recycle it and redirect it toward adaptive order and understanding? This is a choice that we theoretically have if we wake up to it. Tibetan Buddhists call the dual potentiality that I just described co-emergence, and it exists in every moment of experience. Confusion and wisdom arise as possibilities simultaneously in every moment, and we decide which way to go. As E. E. Cummings says in one of his poems, you pays your money and you takes your choice. Ain't freedom grand? Most of the time, we are asleep at the switch, not realizing what is in front of us. It is predominantly when we experience strong negative emotion that we have the opportunity to wake up to co-emergence. Generally speaking, we hate these times, though. We despise them and will do almost anything to escape from them because they're so painful. But this is a huge mistake. These miserable times are some of our most fruitful opportunities for awakening. This is because the best times and the worst times, awakening and confusion, inhabit the same duplex with only a thin party wall separating them. But we have to be able to bear the pain to open to this reality. And this is where the aforementioned affect tolerance comes in. Affect tolerance, finally, is typically developed through meditative and contemplative disciplines over long periods of practice. Just in case I haven't been sufficiently clear, transforming negative emotions is not for the faint of heart. It's not for spiritual dilettantes or confidence men and women. It is only for those who have realized deeply that something that they're doing is not quite right. The not quite part is non-trivial, furthermore. It's fundamental, requiring a massive reorganization of consciousness, the way we think. As the apocryphal Zen master is reputed to have said, better not start, because the journey is seemingly endless. Fortunately, the path to awakening here is not all about toughing it out. Some of it is, mind you, some of it is. We do have to become emotionally resilient, or the entire enterprise will be a waste of time. But there are ameliorating factors, strategies, and additional resources that we can employ to facilitate the journey. Sean, would you share the second chart entitled Obstacles and Wisdoms? Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, has endless categorizations. Endless, I'm not kidding. And this is a simple one. This one pertains to tonight's subject. The names of the Buddha families here are not critically important. They're on the left. I include them in order to assist you in transitioning from your own spreadsheet to the negative emotions and associated wisdoms themselves. In the middle column are generic practices that assist in taming the negative emotions. Eventually, they facilitate, in turn, the awakening of the associated wisdoms. Wisdoms over here, obstacles, negative emotions here, with their Buddha family name and then a description of them. This is the wisdom name, description of what that wisdom actually is. And these are some antidotes that I'll speak about now. In the middle column are generic practices that assist in taming the negative emotions. Eventually, they facilitate, in turn, the awakening of the associated wisdoms over here. These antidotes are basically cognitive injunctions to be employed when negative emotion arises. For those of you familiar with the Mahayana Buddhist practices, you will recognize the antidotes as 5 of the 6 paramitas, the transcendent actions or the perfections, so-called. When you catch yourself being spaced out in ignorance, point the flashlight of wide-angled pervasive awareness at your ignorance and rest there. Use this. When you catch yourself kidnapped by aggression, be patient with your experience in the sense of exercising forbearance, not patience in the sense of drumming your fingers on the desk, but patience in the sense of being with it for as long as necessary, forbearing. Exercise forbearance with it and rest there. When you catch yourself in poverty-stricken jealousy, this is my favorite hangout, or used to be, flip your focus to one of joyful appreciation of whatever kindles your covetousness and rest there. When you catch yourself in the throes of desirous passion, practice the discipline of letting go and rest there. When you catch yourself basking in bloated, self-indulgent pride, imagine giving everything that you have away to others and rest there. These practices are very akin to cognitive therapy because you shift your attention from a negative preoccupation to an antidote or replacement for it. You cannot hold both thoughts at the same time, one or the other. You can either hold the negative emotion or you can hold the antidote. You can't do both, although typically we switch back and forth very rapidly. In contradistinction to cognitive therapy, however, you do not attempt here to banish the negativity. You sidle up to it instead while employing the antidote for it. Sidle up to it just the way I told you that Trungpa Rinpoche sidled up to depression. He got as close to it as he possibly could, but didn't indulge in it. You quiet the negativity. You tame it. You make friends with it. You familiarize yourself with the nascent energy within it. You begin to learn how to ride it without being kidnapped by it, etc., etc., etc. Sean, you can return. Thank you. You begin to learn to transform the negative emotion into wisdom. After much practice, and much is a relative term here, varying greatly from one person to the next, you almost instinctively flash on the possibility of different wisdom potentials whenever negative emotions arise. When the negativity is really strong, you may not be able to tap into the wisdom potential right away, but, and this is key, you have a lingering awareness in spite of everything that such wisdom potential does exist, and a small part of you posts a vigil for it so that it may visit you later when you've quieted down. This is powerful stuff, Dharma brothers and sisters. Powerful, powerful stuff. Now it's time for the AMA part of this discussion, what we call the Ask Me Anything part, AMA, Ask Me Anything. That portion of tonight's program. The Ask Me Anything moniker obviously exists in a context, though, the context being our designated subject for the evening. Comments as well as questions are welcome, of course. Conciseness being the coin of the realm in this latter respect. So I'm going to open it up to comments and questions now, and it may be a little back and forth if that feels comfortable for you. And Sean will call on anybody who raises his or her hand. You can raise your hand in the chat, or since we can't see a lot of your faces, you'll have to do it via the chat rather than literally raising your hand.
Yeah, so feel free to take a moment to sit with things. And it's if you've never, many of us, I think, have never joined us for these conversations. And really, anything that comes up is worth asking and commenting on. And please feel free to use the chat if that's helpful for you and you feel more comfortable. Hey, Alex.
Hello.
Good evening,
Hi, Charles.
Alex. Good to see you again.
Thank you. And hi, Sean, and hello, everyone. Good to be together, working on stuff. I'm wondering, what is the relationship between core beliefs, schemas, and the Buddhist conception of the self? So I think, did you say something along the lines that when strong negative emotion arises, that the selfing becomes more evident, something along those lines? Anything you think about, any thoughts you have on around that topic? Yeah, thank you.
Well, one of the I'll take it in a couple of steps. One of the things that becomes apparent when you start doing a reasonable amount of meditation is that any attempt that you perform in trying to find an immutable sense of self is fruitless. You can never find it. And this does not mean that we don't have a relative identity that we function with in everyday life, but it's constantly shifting. It's very mercurial. It grows, it diminishes, etc. But this sense of something that is permanent and will reside in the Akashic record forever is a fiction. And it's not a fiction because somebody says so. It's because when you try to find it, you simply cannot find it. And it's the fruit of experience of people, many people more practiced than us have discovered over time. Now, what you said about beliefs, well, let's see, you asked about the negative emotions being shoring up this sense of self. They are one of the ways that we tend to try to protect ourselves from this awareness that we don't really ultimately exist. One of the ways we do it is by collecting all kinds of things around us, people around us who make us think that we're as great as we think we are. Another way that we do it is by repelling everyone and everything that conflicts with this idea, that is giving us the message that we're not who we think we are. And the third method, paradigmatic method, is just ignoring anything that gets in the way. And of course, we all do all of these things, but most of us have and then there's jealousy and pride, but there's sort of further elaboration. We all have a go-to strategy, which is predominant for the most part, even though we may do the other ones. And sometimes we have the go-to strategy is very strong, and the weakest one is very weak. But we all have them all. I don't know if that does that answer your
Does
question at all?
selfing, yeah, does selfing also include negative beliefs? So let's say someone who's had a traumatizing experience and who carry with them this experience that they are not safe, or that other people can't be trusted, or that the world is a dangerous place, and they experience uh, flooding, let's say. Is that connected with the sense of selfing, that I am this kind of person?
Well,
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
these are powerful, powerful, powerful experiences, and they can be they can form your whole experience over the course of a lifetime if you don't get some help dealing with them.
Hmm.
But the message here is not to poo-poo them in any way. The same way I am not poo-pooing the negative emotions in any way. I'm saying these things, this is powerful stuff, but
Right.
I'm saying that they have no ultimate
Hmm.
ultimate reality, that
True.
ultimately you can get beyond this. But it would be a mistake, what's frequently called a spiritual bypass in the spiritual traditions, if
Hmm.
you immediately try to bypass these uh, large obstacles that you may have in your experience. You have to deal with them first. If you have significant PTSD, uh, you need to deal with it. And it's hard work, and it can take a long time, and it requires some real assistance from others. That needs to be worked through. You can't sweep it under the rug uh, peremptorily by saying, oh, this doesn't really exist. You have to have the very personal experience of realizing in your own heart that it has no ultimate existence. That this has really been terrible, but this is not me. I don't know if that helps. I hope so.
Does help. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. It feels worth mentioning, if you all don't already know, Alex is the editor of our illustrious Cushion and Couch, our journal. If you haven't seen that, you can find it online. And if you have any interest in contributing to that, I encourage you to connect with Alex.
Well, you have,
More questions and comments?
don't hold back. Don't hold back. Does this make sense to you, or does it seem too highfalutin?
Well, I can jump in to keep things moving, Charles. It's certainly a lot to digest. So one of the applications I'm thinking about is, how do I utilize this way of thinking to be of assistance to those that I am working with in a clinical setting? What's one sort of simple thing I can do to remember some of the wisdom that's embedded in this Dharma?
Well, I'll go back to something thank you, Sean. I'll go back to something I said at the outset, that these strong negative emotions are not garbage in our consciousness that we need to get rid of as quickly as possible. Uh, they have arisen because they serve an adaptive purpose over time. They're drawing our attention to uh, problematic issues that we need to pay attention to. So when we're dealing with somebody who has the shorthand summary of tonight's talk really is that uh, everything we experience has some uh, wisdom potential embedded in it. And when we experience great difficulty, the great difficulty may seem so powerful that we can't see anything else. But there's usually some teaching in it if we can settle down enough to see it and let it settle out. Uh, when we get very, very angry, for example, if we can settle and not act out that anger, which becomes aggression and will come back to haunt us sometimes for decades. Uh, you can say something in a moment of anger that will stick with you for the rest of your life. If you say the wrong thing to your spouse, she or he will never forget it. Even though they forgive you for it, they will never forget it. So in a moment of anger, we can do a lot of damage, but there may be something in that moment of anger that needs to be adaptively addressed. And but you have to quiet down and see what that is. So when a patient or client comes to you with a problem, I always try to see if I can quiet them down enough in the session to actually begin to mine a little bit of the wisdom that's embedded in the experience that they're having, the valence of which seems to be so negative. But I know from my own experience that that's not all there is, and that if you throw it out, it's like throwing recyclables into the trash. It's a waste, and we don't have endless experiences in life, and the negative ones need to be processed thoroughly so that we learn what they're trying to teach us. And that's what sometimes I can say that straight up to someone that I'm working with. Sometimes I have to be more indirect about it. It depends on where they are in this process and how much they can settle in the presence of their own negative experience. And sometimes it always takes time. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes a short time, maybe a few minutes, but it always takes time. And it's an ongoing process. At one point, I said that sometimes I've been doing this for a long time, so that I don't want to get political here, but on election night, I was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty disappointed. And I was wondering, how am I going to deal with this? And I immediately thought to myself, well, I can go down the chute of just despair and negativity and everything that I think might go wrong here. Or what can I learn from this? What is this telling me that I need to pay attention to? Because obviously I missed something. And admittedly, I admit that I was not able to do a thorough job of that, but at least I knew in the back of my mind that this was a subject that I needed to return to and return to and return to until I learned what I need to learn from it. Otherwise, I'm just pissing away a lot of energy and disappointment and learning nothing. Now, that's the election. That personal experience is much more deeply and subtly felt. But the same principle applies. Whenever something comes up, I try to encourage people to hang on to it and see, what is it telling you? What is there? What is there in this that is worthwhile? Where's the ore in this uranium that you can use to advantage? Otherwise, it's just another experience that you've had and you haven't learned anything from it, which probably means you're going to go through it again.
I appreciate you mentioning that, Charles, because I think a lot of what's happening in the news for many of us is actually feels very personal. Kimberly has put something in the chat that I'll read. She says, "Thank you for your talk. Can you say something about grief, including perhaps wisdom potentials or antidotes?" So a question about grief.
I don't want to be coy, but let me, since this is obviously an important question for you, Kimberly, what are your own thoughts about that? You've probably given this more thought than I have, or maybe this is currently on your mind because of some grief event in your own life. What are your own thoughts about it?
Well, Kimberly has put something in the chat. I don't know if do you want to speak, Kimberly, or maybe others can step in?
I'm happy to speak. I apologize. I'm on the sidewalk, so there may be some background noise.
Oh,
Um,
wonderful.
it,
Thanks
it
for stepping
seems
in,
to,
Kimberly.
of course, and thank you for your talk again. It seems to me like a possible wisdom potential of grief might be the recognition of impermanence and the possibility of letting go. Um, and I guess traditionally an antidote might be the cultivation of um, the Brahma Viharas. Um, um, but I'm especially, and I guess personally interested in when grief or anger, in particular, perhaps in response to trauma, become more habitual and chronic, so that I don't know, I guess in my personal experience, maybe there's some delusion or lack of attention mixed in, where the nascent energy isn't um, as salient. It's more of like a habitual grief or anger, perhaps.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, I think, first of all, I would say that grief is not a negative emotion in the sense that we're talking about the other emotions here of passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride. I would say that uh, grief is you touched on it yourself. It is a reminder of impermanence, which is uh, impermanence and uncertainty are the two things that we're guaranteed in life. I can't think of anything else. Those are the two things that we're guaranteed. So it is certainly a reminder of impermanence. Uh, Grief, however, takes different forms with different people. For some people, grief is becomes very angry grief, and in that case, it's uh, the antidote is dealing with the anger, having forbearance with the anger to quiet that down and see clearly the Vajra quality of seeing very clearly what's going on. And seeing clearly is seeing that impermanence is real, and there is no um, ultimate balm or salve for it. We have to face it squarely. There's not for some people, grief is. I remember having a patient one time who uh, could not get over the loss of her mother, uh, who had passed away a couple of decades previously. And in her case, there was an aspect of not really there was sort of a Buddha family quality of not really paying attention clearly to what had happened, not simply owning up to the fact that her mother had passed away. At some very deep level, her mother had not died. She had not owned up to this possibility. And in my work with her, one of the things I had to do was get her to come more into the present and realize that this was a large loss, and that just like the Buddha did with the mustard seed experiment, um, this was not an experience unique to her. This was every woman's experience. And part of being a human being is learning to deal with this experience and to be able to go forward. And I was able to help her a little bit, but this was a long-standing problem with her. So the underlying thing here, Kimberly, is I think that it's not just grief. Grief is not a negative emotion in the sense that I've been talking about the paradigmatic negative emotions here, the kleshas, as they're sometimes called in the Dharmic traditions. But grief can take on the flavor of one of these negative emotions. The way that some people experience grief is very angry. Some people experience it by sort of ignoring it and sweeping it under the rug. and it just simmers there. Other people experience it in different ways. So I think the key is figuring out which of these ways do you experience it, and then use the antidote associated there to deal with it. I hope that's a little bit helpful.
Yes, thank you so much.
And I can't help but notice, Charles, how often grief presents itself as one of these: ignorance or aggression or jealousy. We seem culturally so averse to feeling the kind of tenderness and usefulness of grief. We don't seem to be practiced in it or available to it. So often I seem to see people with a kind of passion or some sort of one of these poisons that ends up as a secondary emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if others feel or notice similar things.
Let me ask a question of all of you. In the course of the talk tonight, or in looking at these exercises that I passed out, if you had a chance to do that beforehand, or even doing it in real time while we were talking about it, do any of you have a better sense than you did at the beginning of where the real negative struggles reside for you? And the real point of tonight's discussion is, in contradistinction, where your greatest strengths also are. If your greatest struggle is with anger, it is very, very likely that one of your greatest talents is seeing things incisively clearly. And that you may have difficulty, in fact, oftentimes when you say things to other people, because you say it so clearly, and you don't mean it aggressively at all, but it's so clear that other people feel it as as an attack. And so you have to learn that sometimes I cannot be quite so clear with somebody because they are not used to that. But the important thing here is, whatever your most difficult struggle is, there is probably a very closely allied strength that you have that is a partner for that. And you may oscillate back and forth between these things. People who struggle a lot with anger usually have very good critical intelligence, but they have to be careful how they dispense this critical intelligence, because sometimes it's too strong a dose for other people. But do you have any greater sense of where your own principal struggles are, and correspondingly, what your greatest strengths might be that you can learn how to mine from that if you sidle up to it more closely? That's the idea here. The idea is not to dwell on negative emotion, but the idea is to learn how to transform it, and begin to have an instinctive and intuitive sense of what you transform it into. Meg?
Yes, thank you for this evening. Along that point that you just raised is, how we can see the strength in what could be a negative behavior. In working with your clients, could you illustrate how you will help them convert that negative energy into and helping them shift that into a more wiser awareness of how that energy could be transformed into a more wiser outcome with their energy.
Is there a particular one of these that you would like
Uh,
to talk about in particular?
well, thank you for that. I don't think it really matters. It's more the methodology that maybe you could help illustrate. Um, where you have we'll just say you have a client that comes who, um, has difficulty controlling anger or difficulty um, controlling their wants for things,
Mhm.
their
Okay.
passions, and um, and so you take it from there, either one, any flavor that you want to choose, and just maybe illustrate how you and I realize it's it can take years, but what the conversation would be to with your client to guide them.
Well, anger is a good one because anger is so in your face
Yeah.
that it's easier to talk about than passion, for example, or pride. So I will talk about anger, and I deal with it a lot with some of my patients in particular. The first thing that I typically do, and this can take a long time, meaning longer than a single session, for example,
Of
uh,
course.
um, for a given episode of being angry. But the first thing is just to be uh, listen to them talk uh, until they've slowed down. Let them be angry, which is a paradoxical way of letting them get close to it. I don't try to say, "Oh, don't be angry here." I say, "Oh, what's really going on? What are you angry about?" Uh, and 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 sometimes it may take a long time for this arc to crest and to come down a little bit. And then when it begins to come down, I might say something like, well, what do you think? Uh, what's the real reason that you're angry? What is it that needs to be fixed here? Uh, Usually there's something that's wrong. It's not just that there really is an underlying cause. And usually this underlying cause it may be something that really needs to be dealt with. So I might say, well, what are you angry about? Um, and that might be a long discussion too. But that might not come across very peacefully at first. But I wait for it to become more peaceful. Like, what I'm really angry at is that, I just felt ignored. I just felt I was so hurt. I was so ignored. Then when someone gets to that point of acknowledging in a deep way what the hurt really is, instead of trying to push all the energy out, which is what anger is, it's pushing it all away, but actually owning it and letting it um, settle a little bit in them at that point, and it's always a little bit of guesswork, but some sense I might say, well, when we're talking about anger, it's usually anger at another person or organization or something where other people are involved. I might say, well, what would you uh, what would you really like to say to this person? Uh, and that, and but that's not, I don't ask that question when they're angry and pushing away, because then what you'll get is an insult, you know, something that's going to be destructive. But what I'll wait till it quiets down and I'll say, well, what do you think in your heart of hearts you would really like to communicate to this other person about what it was that they did that was hurtful to you, that is not in any way insulting them, but is actually respecting them. But it takes a while to quiet down to that point. And that's beginning to tap into the underlying wisdom here. what did you get angry about? Well, something was amiss. What's the skillful way to address this problem so that you don't escalate the situation, but actually bring the situation under control? And when this is done well, and this is everyone who's done therapy has had this experience. When you negotiate a misunderstanding or a conflict effectively, and it's never 100% effective, but when you get one through an episode of something like this effectively, you usually advance the relationship. The relationship improves as a result of getting over a conflict or getting through a misunderstanding. But it only advances if you do it in a way that is not escalating the conflict. And this takes quieting down and tapping into what the underlying real understanding is that you need to have here. And it may take a while to get to it. Some people are so angry that they almost never get to this point. And oftentimes very narcissistic people are very hard to get them to settle down to this point where they can have that insight. But and you can't rush it. If you try to rush it, it will backfire almost every time. And sometimes you make the mistake of rushing it. You thought that the other person was ready, but you discovered that they weren't. I don't know. Am I helpful there at all?
Yeah, I think it is. And I imagine that it would be useful to help that person pause and see how their energy is shifting to being more insightful when they say, I'm angry because I've been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
That's a clarity, or for that client. And so I was just, considering that these words that you have for wisdom manifestations are actually good reinforcers to help them acknowledge the shift, and using those words, insight. That's a very precise thought that you had, or whatever.
When you have one of these exchanges with a patient, and it's generally successful, it becomes something that you can refer back to in future instances. Because if someone has an overarching problem with anger, you're going to see it many times. Right. It's not going to appear once and you take care of it and it's gone forever. No, you're going to see it again. And the next time you see it, again, you can't rush in, but at some point in the discussion, second time around, you might say, remember when we talked about such and such? And you said, oh, I was angry because I was hurt. Well, what would you say this time? What is it this time? It's different this time, but what is it? Build on prior experience. And the implicit teaching that you hope that they will take in is that they will gradually learn to do this for themselves. They will gradually be able to refer back to their own experience and say, last time this happened, I did so and so, and that was that worked pretty well, or that didn't work well at all, and I'm not going to do that again.
Thank you,
But we have to teach people to do this sometimes. I've been taught by many good friends and teachers.
Thank you for jumping in, Meg. Charles, we have a couple of related comments in the chat that, looking in the time, we might have 2 or perhaps 3 minutes just to touch base on.
Okay.
Tamara is mentioning, she says, definitely I'm the spacey type. And Hattie's curious. She says, I'm interested in hearing more about addressing the ignorant spacey type. So maybe you could riff on that for a minute or so before we start to close things out.
Okay. Well, I can riff on that less well than I can riff on anger, because that is one of the ones that I am less familiar with. there are many times when I wish that I were a little more spacey than I am. It would be a big help.
So help me understand spacey then. What does that mean? The ignorant spacey type compared to the angry.
Yeah, I'm getting to that. Well, the function of ignorance is to um, ignore things, but consciously or semi-consciously, that are problematic. And if you catch yourself doing that, the antidote is just to, instead of closing your awareness down and reducing these things to a dot, hoping that it disappears, open the angle up and let it present itself. Sort of wide-angled awareness, and it's very it has to be very consciously employed. One of the passion is the easiest paradigmatic emotion to work with, because a passionate person is always coming towards you, and that's easy to deal with, easier because it's there. Uh, Anger is more difficult because an angry person is pushing you away, and it's hard to figure out how to stay in the space. The ignorance or the spacey quality is the most difficult to work with, because it's always aspiring to disappear right in front of you. So you have a hard time putting your finger on it in the first place. And so it is, it's easy to point out to somebody how they're being difficult, but it's hard to point out to somebody what they're not seeing. But one way and again, I'm afraid my answer is less articulate here, or less useful than it might be with talking about anger. But I think the key thing is that when you notice this happening, the main thing is that the direct application of mindfulness in its straightforward application is the antidote. Pay attention, because ignorance or ignoring is really the practice of not paying attention. I hope that's a tiny bit helpful.
So Alex is raising his hand, and I'm noticing the time is 8:12, and we're looking to close at 8:15. So Alex, do you want to chime in before we
Just
move to
a
some
quick thought.
sitting? Yeah.
It seems ignorance perhaps would be more accurately translated as avoidance. Not ignorance in the sense of not having read books, but ignorance in the sense of a habit of trying to avoid facing reality or having certain thoughts, feelings. Anyway, you don't need, that's it.
Oh, very, very well said. And you're spot on with that. That's the reason that in the chart I put down ignorance should be understood as semi-conscious ignoring. It's a verb. It's something that you do. And so, yes, avoidance is a very good synonym, and in some ways a more heuristic synonym expression than ignorance. Quite so. Ignorance is this has nothing to do with learning in the sense of education. So you're dead right about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So Charles, it's 8:13. How would you like to take us home?
Well, I hope this is, thank you, Sean, and thank you all for coming and for your questions and comments. I hope this has been a little bit helpful. The main message here is that negativity is always a messenger for us. And the real challenge that we have as Dharma practitioners is to figure out what that message is and unpack it. And the more skill that we are able to bring to that, the less likely we are to be repelled by the negativity that we experience, and by the negativity of others. This is very helpful for working with others. But if you haven't done the work yourself, the negativity of others will scare you even more than your own. So And you know this in your therapeutic work, that sometimes you encounter things that are just unmanageable for you because they're things that you haven't really touched in your own experience. Anyway, that's the short message for tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. Let's end with a brief sit of about a minute.
Sounds good. 1 minute it is. I would just want to draw folks' attention to the chat. There's some links in there. There's a document with links and resources and other places you can be connected. Let's sit together for 1 minute. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to unmute your mics and say goodnight, goodbye, peace, or whatever leaving blessing you'd like to leave us with. Peace, everyone.
Thank you.
One other thought. If any of you wish to contact me offline, you are welcome to do so. And if you have further questions, I'll be glad to respond to you as best I can. Happy to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Bye.
Namaste.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.